My wife and I like to watch old movies and old TV shows. We like the black and white. We don't mind that. I'm talking about shows like Andy Griffith or Leave It to Beaver. In fact, our streaming platform that we use to watch TV has a Leave It to Beaver channel 24/7. So we don't watch it 24/7, but we watch it a lot. And we already know a lot of the episodes. Both of those shows have episodes, because we're very familiar with the episodes. Both of those shows have episodes where the boys in each show, Opie and Leave It to Beaver and Theodore, or Beaver, right? And Opie and Andy Griffith and Theodore, or Beaver, in Leave It to Beaver, where they run away from home. And these are not the only shows that have episodes about somebody running away from home, children running away from home, because it's a tale as old as time. In fact, some of you might have your own funny stories about getting fed up at home when you were children and deciding, now I'm going to leave home because maybe you didn't get your own way or whatever might have happened. But there are also some terribly sad and tragic stories about running away from home. And today I'm not going to be talking about childhood runaway moments, but I'll be talking about people who decided to run away from their spiritual home. They decided to run away from the things that they learned at home, from the values their parents taught them. They decided to run away from God, from their faith, from everything that was familiar to them. This is the era in which people are deconstructing their faith, which may not necessarily be a bad thing, but a lot of times they deconstruct it and they never reconstruct it in the correct way. So Jesus used stories that we call parables to teach important life lessons. So today we're going to read from Luke chapter 15, where Jesus told a very famous story that we refer to now as the story of the prodigal son, or the lost son. And this story is a picture of what happens when you run away from God. What happens when you run away from God? In this story that we're going to read today, the father represents God, and the sons, there are two sons, an older son and a younger son. The younger son is the one who runs away from home, but both sons represent us. So as we go through this parable, this story today, I'm going to be reading some stories of real people who ran from God. These are real people who submitted their stories, and they gave us permission to share their stories today. And I think as you hear these stories, I'm going to read several of them. I think as you hear these stories, you're going to see some parallels between their stories and the story that Jesus told in Luke 15. So let's begin reading in Luke 15, beginning with verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them." Okay, so the father in this story apparently is well off. He had an estate. We know he had livestock. We know he had a fatted calf, which means he had other livestock as well. And so what would have happened is at his death, his money, his estate, everything would have been divided between his two sons. But the younger son was very impatient. He didn't want to wait until his father died. He wanted his share of the money right away. And in the culture of the original listeners who were hearing this story from Jesus, that demand by the younger son would have been the ultimate insult. They all would have understood that. If a son asked for his inheritance before his father's death, that was like wishing that his father was already dead. And so the father would have been real hurt. The people listening to the story Jesus was telling would have been shocked at this demand. But the father couldn't force his son to stay or couldn't force him to do the right thing. So he divided the money and gave each of his sons their share. And the younger son got what he wanted, the money. So look at the next verse, verse 13. "Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country." Okay, so he leaves home, and he doesn't just leave home. He goes as far away as he can to a distant country. Like many people who have said, "Man, I can't wait to get out of this town," right? "I can't wait to leave San Angelo, whatever town you may be in. and I'm going to get as far away from here as possible. That's what this young man did. And this was more than a desire to go see the world. This younger son abandoned his way of life, his way of thinking, abandoned the values of his father, the things he had been taught, the things he had believed himself at one time. Everything his father stood for, everything his home stood for, he ran from that. I've been a pastor for a long time. I've seen people make the same decisions, this same decision. I've seen teenagers and young adults. I've seen adults, husbands, wives make this decision. I've even seen older adults make this decision, and they turn their backs on God and they run. And I'm sure I don't know all the reasons why people run from God, but I've heard enough of their stories and seen enough to know some of the reasons that people run from God. For example, some people run because God's boundaries to them feel like restrictions or punishment. In other words, they don't want limits. They don't want rules. They want to do their own thing. They don't want anybody to tell them what to do. They want to follow their own way. They don't want to feel the disapproval of people. And they feel like, I don't even need the approval of anybody. I'm just going to do my own thing. So they run from God. Other people run because they want to prove that they don't need anybody. They don't need anything. These are things that I've seen. They want to prove that they don't need anybody else's way. They don't even need God's way in their lives. They can do things the way they want. They want to do things their way. Other people run, and this is so heartbreaking to me. Other people run because they've been disappointed with people, and their disappointment with people leads to anger towards God. Have you seen that happen? Where people respond to very deep or profound hurt by leaving God and everybody and everything connected to God. I think it's a misplaced anger. They decide that mean and angry people represent God, and so they say, I don't need that kind of God. I don't need that, that kind of those kinds of relationships. And I especially hurt for those kinds of runaways, because I know that at times we have misrepresented God as a church. But I want you to listen. I told you I was going to share some stories of people who submitted their stories and gave their permission. Somebody wrote this. They said, when I was 16, my home church went through a church split. I was so disillusioned by the words and actions of people that I used that as an excuse to run from God. Somebody else said, some serious stuff came up in life, one of which was when my uncle, who was the biggest Christian I knew, failed miserably. This person says that, combined with a couple of other events, made me decide God wasn't worth following. So they ran from God. They ran away. And still there are some who run because of poor relationship choices. And let's face it, our friends have an impact on us. The Bible says that bad company corrupts good character. And some of these people had foolish friends that convinced them to leave the faith, to leave home, to leave God. One person who wrote in said this, I ran from God for almost 3 years, and it was the darkest time in my life. I started my senior year of high school and continued through some of my early college years. I fell victim to peer pressure and wanting to fit in. I did things because everyone was doing them, or I thought it made me look cool. I convinced myself that my life was carefree and perfect when really I was depressed. I was spiraling out of control and using whatever I could to self-medicate my pain. I was in denial and was in a toxic relationship that only fueled me to do more wrong. That happens. And other people run because of an addiction, because something else took control of their lives, where they're no longer felt in control. One girl said this, I ran from God when I was 14 years old and I started drinking and using drugs. I dropped out of high school in the 10th grade. I got my first DWI at the age of 18, my second at the age of 20, and my last at the age of 21. I was constantly in and out of jail and rehab facilities. At 21, I ended up on probation and got in with the wrong guy and started using meth for 2 years straight. Those are sad but true stories. And still others run out of habit. Out of habit. In other words, that's what they've done their entire lives. They've run. Now, sadly, this is a learned behavior for many people because they were raised to run by parents who also ran. And I got to tell you, mom and dad, what you do doesn't happen in a vacuum. What you do affects your children. One person said it this way: when I got old enough to decide if I wanted to go to church or not, I did the same thing my parents did. I found excuses not to go. I started drinking when I was a sophomore in high school, and it got worse when I graduated. I would wake up in random places unsure of how I got there. I would go to work hungover, in some cases still drunk. That kind of behavior was modeled by my stepfather, so I thought it was okay. And then some people run simply because they're lonely. They're lonely. There's an epidemic of loneliness in our society today. And it's not so much that they're running from something, but they're running towards something. They think that they're running towards something that's going to give them a new life, that's going to be filled with friends and fun, a carefree life, something that will get rid of their loneliness. So regardless of the reasons, there's nothing as sad to me as watching somebody run away, run from God. You know where it's headed. Many of you, like me, have lived long enough that you can predict the end result. The prodigal son ran from his father, and looking at his story, we can see what happens when you run. We can see it. So let's read verse 13 again. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. That's predictable. Come on. We can see it happening, right? The prodigal son wasted his father's money, what he demanded from the father. He didn't invest it. He didn't want this money so he could invest it and get more money out of it than if he had kept it with his father. No, he didn't invest it. He didn't save it. He didn't run away from home to become a missionary or a rabbi. You know, this is a Jewish home. He ran away to party. And we don't know how long it took for him to lose everything. My guess is it didn't take very long. But we're seeing a pattern here begin to form. It's a predictable pattern because it's what you can expect when you run from God. You know, we look at the prodigal son, we look at this story, and we say, well, that wasn't very smart. He lost all his money in wild living. That wasn't very smart. No, it wasn't. But look, it's a predictable part of the pattern. And here's the pattern. We see it in the story. When you run from God, you make bad decisions. That's part of the pattern. When you run from God, you make bad decisions. You do things you never thought you would do. Come on, let's face it. When you run away, you don't plan to make dumb decisions. It's just one of the consequences when you run. You don't plan to make stupid decisions and land you in trouble. It's just part of the pattern. I've seen it repeatedly in the lives of people who run from God. When they finally come back, they say, when they finally come to their senses, they say, what was I thinking? I've heard those exact words said to me when I asked them, what were you thinking? I don't know. What was I thinking? What in the world made me do that? How did I ever get to a point where I was making that decision? Or somebody might say, why did I even marry him? Or why did I even marry her? Why did I spend so much money on that? I mean, you make bad decisions and you do dumb things. That's just what happens when you run. Look at verse 14. The first part of it says, and after he had spent everything, he spent all the money his father gave him. That was a bad decision. Again, it's part of the pattern. Secondly, when you run from God, you lose. You lose. I've been reading stories from people who ran from God, and one thing they have in common is they all lost. They lost. Some of them lost money. Some of them lost their families. Some of them lost their jobs. Some of them lost their careers. Some of them lost their marriages or their friends. Some of them lost their innocence. Some of them lost their reputation. Over and over and over, we see that this is what happens when you run from God. You lose. When you run from God, you lose. And you know what? It's so painful to see. It's heartbreaking. Verse 14 tells us this. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. That's a losing situation. That's a losing situation. In other words, he was hungry. He had no money. And I guarantee you, when the son, this younger son, left home, he didn't consider that possibility. All he thought was, okay, I'm going to make my own decisions. Man, I'm going to have fun, have lots of friends. He didn't consider the possibility that he would lose out, that he would be in need. But that's what happens. And next, we learn from this story that when you run from God, your plans fail. When you run from God, your plans fail. When you're in the middle of the situation and you say, how did this happen? This was never my plan. This is not the way I saw things working out. No, from the outside looking in, we would say, how could it not happen? You're running away from God. You left home. And I know, every runaway thinks that their story is going to end up differently, right? Oh, I'm different. And people try to talk to their parents or whomever, maybe children to the parents who are running from God. It's like, can't you see where this is headed? No, this is going to be different. I'm not going to be like those other people. But I caution you, learn from others. Because if we were to take a mic today and pass it around to all of you, former runners and people maybe who are even currently running from God, I think you would say, it's not as good as it looks. And it's sure not what I expected. But when you run from God, it's inevitable. Your plans will fail, your relationship plans, your financial plans, your future plans. One day you're going to look around and you're going to say, wow, getting pregnant was not part of my plan. Or wow, being broke, I didn't count on that. Or man, being addicted, I didn't plan on that. Wasn't part of my plan. Being lonely wasn't part of my plan. I never planned it this way. In my years, and not just in ministry, but just as an adult now, I've never met somebody who said, man, I'm so glad I ran from God. Everything has just worked out perfectly. It's been ideal, been perfect. And some people will blame God. Have you heard this? Some people will blame God. But let me tell you, God didn't do this to you. Remember, you ran from his protection, and you ran from his blessings. You ran from his love. That's just what happens when you run. And I want you to see this principle right here, very important principle. There is a connection. Think about this. There is a connection between what is happening in your life and what you have decided about God. There's a connection between what is happening in your life and what you have decided about God. The prodigal son was going to be rich and free, having fun with his father's money, but all his plans failed. Look at verse 15. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Now remember, this was a Jewish home. Right? For him, for a Jewish young man to be feeding pigs, I mean, that was a sign, a sure sign of failure. Far from the comfort and security and blessings of home. He got a job in a pig pen. How embarrassing do you think that was for him? How embarrassing that must have been. Because the prodigal son was supposed to be special. He said, I'm going to be different. I'm going to go out. I'm not going to be like my brother who's stuck at home, just doing whatever my dad wants. I'm different. And now here he is, feeding pigs, taking care of pigs. Because when you run, it's so important. When you run, you end up embarrassed and ashamed. Because you knew better, right? I know better, right? Somebody tells you, don't do that. Oh, I know. They know everything. But you end up being embarrassed and ashamed. And the reason this is so difficult is because a lot of the times that shame becomes then the biggest hurdle for a runaway to come back to God. I'd love to come home. I'd love to come back to God, but what will the people think of me? What will they say? I'm just so ashamed. Like I've done some dumb things. Let me tell you, don't ever let guilt and shame keep you away from God. First of all, you can't run forever. And I'm telling you, come home to God today. Come home to God. What will people think? You know what? People who are genuine followers of Jesus are going to celebrate you. They're going to love you. They're going to welcome you. That's what they're going to think. Forget about the critics and the cynics. Don't listen to them. How many of you know there are some mean and ugly people out there? Even in the churches, I'm sorry to say. But don't let mean and ugly people and angry people keep you from coming home. Overcome the embarrassment and the shame and come home. Look at verse 16. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Now, wait a minute. What happened to other people who helped him spend his money? Where were they? Where are all the people he partied with? All the people he got drunk with? Nobody gave him anything. Nobody was there for him. What happened to the prodigal son will eventually happen to you if you keep running from God. Because the people who got drunk with you aren't going to want to detox with you. You'll be left alone. And I don't know, maybe this story describes you. You left your relationship with God. You left home. You didn't realize the consequences. You thought, yeah, I'm different. This is going to be different. But now you do. Now you see what's going on. So what do you do now? What do you do? Let's look at what the prodigal son did. Look at verse 17. When he came to his senses, first part of that verse, when he came to his senses. What brought the prodigal son to his senses? Reality, right? The consequences. The prodigal son looked around at his situation. He was hungry. He was all alone. He was feeding pigs. He'd be foolish at this point not to come to his senses. Here's another story of a former runaway who said this. After 3 years, the guy I was with physically abused me terribly. I knew enough was enough. I had lost everything, my faith, my schooling, my family, my drive, and most importantly, my happiness. Living in a rundown apartment with a dead-end job and a car that wouldn't start, I decided to call home and ask for help and forgiveness. I love that. But my question is, what will it take for you to come to your senses? How many broken relationships is it going to take? How much more do you have to lose? How many more bad decisions do you have to make? How many more of your plans have to fail before you come to your senses? Why not come home before it gets that bad? If it's not that bad already. It's time to come home. So let's read the rest of that passage, Luke 15:17. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. The prodigal son made a decision. Even if all I do is get a job with my father, if I become one of his hired servants, it's better than this where I am right now. So I'm going home. I'm going back to the safety and the security and the blessings of home. Because when you leave home, that's what you leave. You leave the safety of home, the security of home, the love of home, the blessings of home. But see, that's the message of this story. This is a truth. This is a truth that you must never forget. Please, if you forget everything else I say, remember this. No matter how far you've gone, no matter how long it's been, you can always come home. Can we give God praise for that today? Do you believe that? No matter how far you've gone, no matter how long it's been, you can always come home. It's never too late to come home. No matter how many bad decisions you've made or how many consequences you've suffered, if you're embarrassed or ashamed, you can still come home. Now, maybe you're not thinking so much about what the people will say. What will God say? I turned my back on God. What is he going to do? Well, let's jump ahead in the story to verse 20. Verse 20. So he got up, his son got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Now the father saw him while he was still a long ways off, which tells us that he was looking for him. He was looking out for him. And that's what God will do. And that's what we as God's children will do. We will throw our arms around you and say, welcome home. No lectures, no questions, just welcome home, because it's time to stop running and to come home. See, this verse is a very important part of the story, and I think it's a part of the story that defines this day, Easter. It's not just a story of a son running from his father, but now it's a father who is running to his son. That's what this verse tells us. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son ran from the father, but now the father is running to the son. And that's what God does. He runs toward you. He runs toward his children. You see, the Easter story is about God's relentless pursuit of us. It's the story of Jesus who willingly left us safety and security and the glory of heaven to come to earth to reach us. He lived a perfect life, but instead of receiving a crown, he was given a cross where he suffered, he bled, and he died. Not because he ran from God, but because we ran from God. He paid the price. But that's not the end of the story, because the Bible tells us on the third day, Jesus rose from the grave. He conquered sin and death, proving once again that there is no distance that is too far for God's love to reach us. The empty tomb that we celebrate today, the empty tomb is God's declaration to everyone, every runaway today. And the declaration is this: you can come home. The door is open. The Father is watching and waiting for you to come home. So Easter is your invitation to stop running. Jesus' resurrection is your assurance that you don't have to stay in the pig pen. Why would you need to do that or want to do that? You don't have to live with regret or shame or embarrassment. You can come home to a God who is running toward you with his arms open wide, and a church family that will do the same. Come on, give God your best praise today. So as I finish this, hear this loud and clear. No matter how far you've gone, no matter how many mistakes you've made, Jesus made a way for you. The cross and the empty tomb are his message of love. The cross and the empty tomb say loudly today, come home. Come home. It's time to come home. Don't let another Easter pass you by. Don't keep running. The Father is waiting. He's ready to celebrate your return. He's ready to kill the fatted calf. The same God who raised Jesus from the dead can raise you to new life. And my question is, are you ready to come home? Let's bow for prayer. Father, this morning our hearts are stirred by your word, by this story. Every part of this story says something important to us, because your word doesn't waste words or mince words. And Lord, I thank you, Father, because every one of us, at one time or another were runaways. Every one of us at one time or another turned our backs on you, but You were patient and you reached out to us. We don't stand here, Lord, looking down our noses at people because we've been there. But you were so patient and forgiving with us. And Lord, I pray that everyone here who is in one of the stages of this story, maybe they're contemplating running from you, maybe they are in the middle of a life that is away from you, or maybe they've just decided it's time to come home. I pray that everyone would make that decision right now.